Welcome back to Silicon Bytes, and today we are revisiting a fairly objectionable voice, but one who nonetheless occasionally says some interesting things. That is Igor Girkin, Strelkov. He has come out, and in the last couple of weeks, he has written various letters, made various pronouncements predicting doom, gloom, and failure of Russian forces and Russian strategy in Ukraine. Before we jump into that, thank you to everybody who supports this channel, who likes, subscribes, and shares these videos around within their community. Also, everybody who has supported the channel through Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. I don't get round to thanking everyone individually. I will do, but it goes without saying that your support is received with immense gratitude, and it really, really does help. Let's get into the episode. Strelkov is back with another warning. This time it's about Russia's summer offensive and mobilization. Today we're diving into the prison dispatches of Igor Strelkov, Gerkin, former commander of the Donetsk People's Republic and now a Kremlin critic. I don't know if that's the right word to use for him. You know, when thieves and killers fall out with each other, what word should you actually use? Well, let's stick with critic. For now, he is locked away at the behest of the Kremlin. But he is not locked up for his actual crimes against innocent people, but for his perceived opposition to Putin's regime and to the way the war is being conducted. Make no mistake, he is not objecting to the war itself, just the conduct of it. From his cell, he's issued a devastating assessment of the Russian military's performance in Ukraine and commented on the highly anticipated but faltering summer offensive. He also made recent pronouncements about the ongoing pressures on Putin, which of course have come into stark focus this week with the death of Russia's transport minister yesterday. We'll examine his insights, Gerkin's critique of Russian strategy and tactics, comparing them with independent reporting, and chart what it means for the war's next phase. Gerkin doesn't hold back. In mid-June, he wrote from prison, "Our offensive towards Sumy and Kharkiv and elsewhere will stall and stop in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The enemy will launch one or two strong counter-strikes." He wrote this in a letter to Alexander Gitmanov on the 19th of June 2025. Gerkin is mapping a deadlock, stalled offensives, Ukrainian counterstrikes planned for late summer, with Russian forces scrambling to respond. Gerkin warned this would likely lead into the autumn with no particular gains for the Russian side, or worse, incremental loss of territory by the Russian army. Public reporting also suggests a huge set of double defensive lines are being prepared by Ukraine 20 to 30 kilometers behind the zero line across the length of the front, which, even if Russia reaches it, would exact a huge price in casualties if they try to penetrate it or breach those defences. Indeed, I have seen evidence for these fortifications taking shape when in the Donbass region in April this year. Gerkin underscores a chilling refrain. Until there is a strategic goal of total victory, we will not be able to win. This was from a letter dated 11th of June 2025. So no clear goal, no clear victory, just grinding attrition. And the attrition is not just of Russia's soldiery and materiel, it is exacting a high attritional price on the Russian economy too. Meanwhile, rumours swirl of a new wave of mobilization, this time targeting urban populations. The Jamestown Foundation reports the Kremlin is counting on its summer offensive to achieve Ukrainian capitulation amid challenges of mobilizing enough troops. That is from Jamestown.org. Euronews adds that Moscow is loosening enlistment rules, allowing foreigners into its ranks to dodge the formal process of conscription. That is from Euronews.com. Gerkin predicted all of this earlier in the year. And last year as well, in December, we covered this in an episode on the channel when he declared there will be a second, maybe even a third mobilization wave, because we will be forced to do this. To win, we will have to field at least 500,000 additional soldiers. That is from DW.com. He's calling this out as an inevitability if Putin's war aims and ambitions don't change. More drafts, broader recruitment, deeper into Russian society. This, of course, is Russia's historic problem, in fact. Resources and the level of skill rarely match their overweening and nefarious scale of their ambitions. All this failure and economic stress is causing internal pressure on Putin. From prison, Girkin lambasts the Kremlin's clique. The authorities ignore any chance to self-renew. The enemy will prepare counterstrikes. We will suffer serious deterioration. That is in a letter to Frol Vladimirov, 12th of June 2025, quoted in the FT.com. He accuses Russia's elite of stagnation and strategic paralysis, warning of imminent collapse. In one sentence, he says, "The weak get beaten. If we don't show real strength, everyone will beat us all at once." This is not mere bravado. He's diagnosing vulnerability internally and geopolitically. Western analysts echo his concerns. A Washington Post investigation warns that Russia's military has vast manpower and equipment advantages, but its progress has been so very slow, citing corruption and poor command. That's from the Washington Post.com. The Financial Times confirms summer mobilization pressures, which is pushing Russia to desperate measures. Russia attacks Ukraine's draft offices in what Kiev describes as an attempt by Moscow to disrupt the mobilization of troops. That was covered in the FT.com. So while Gerkin writes from a prison cell, his warnings align with some independent data. Failing campaigns, broader recruitment drives, and a destabilized leadership in Moscow. Well, let's connect all the dots that we've covered so far. Stalling offensives, Sumy and Kharkiv, threats go nowhere. In fact, Russia is being pushed back in Sumy, exposing Russian weakness. But they stick to the same wasteful techniques of probing Ukraine's defensive strengths, in the process eliminating men and armor for little to no gains, and they are still continuing the massed, brutish tactic of using human meat wave attacks. There is the threat of a mobilization push. Murmurs of urban drafts and eased conscription speak volumes about troop shortages, but extending this to the nominal middle class, the educated urban population, carries a huge risk to Putin's regime of triggering another mass exodus of the population. Internal decay. In prison, Gerkin nails this problem. Putin's regime is incapable of reform or decisive strategy. No systemic innovation is possible, as no one can talk truth to the Tsar anymore. And the hierarchical command structure of power blocks criticism and change. We are seeing the results: widespread looting of the system in rampant corruption. People want to get rich before the opportunities come to an end, and anyone who criticizes the conduct of the war is imprisoned, or worse. The system is also becoming less tolerant of perceived failure and far more punitive. Prison sentences for officials have risen from around 7 years to 17 years on average, and it is widely believed that the rash of suicides of top officials and business people are the regime's way of trying to regain control over every part of the system and resources, and in the process they are signaling to others to obey. External confirmation. Western media and defense analysts confirm that the moribund offensive of Russia in Ukraine has stalled, and there is the threat of widening mobilization. Well, here are some of the extended quotes from Gerkin's recent correspondence that add more detail to the ones we've just covered. May 21st, 2025, the explanations to your theses seemed more informative than the theses themselves. Don't build too distant strategic plans. It's not certain you'll control the army in a year or two. That is quoted in the Washington Post. But what does it mean? Well, one interpretation is that Gerkin warns against overly optimistic planning given Russia's current lack of control and cohesion. He's even suggesting that the regime in Moscow may lose control of the army itself, not just the situation in Ukraine. On May 25th, 2025, the prolongation of the military conflict favors the enemy, and we still have a mumbling incoherence instead of a clear strategy. Here, Girkin criticizes continued indecision and vague messaging, warning that the extension of the war, the prolongation of it, and the attritional pressures of the war actually are starting to benefit Ukrainian forces, not the Russian side. On May 28th, 2025, he says the enemy will seek to increase the intensity of military actions. Ukrainian forces will wait until Russian forces start creating a buffer zone and get themselves bogged down. He predicts Ukraine will strike when Russia stretches itself thin, attempting buffer operations in southern Ukraine. Now, this is an interesting phrase. This phrase, buffer zone, is important because Putin and some of his acolytes have actually mentioned it in recent speeches. But militarily, it makes little sense on the side of the aggressor to talk about buffer zones. Occupying Ukrainian territory takes vast amounts of resources and money. If the idea of a buffer zone is to create a bulwark against attack and create some additional security, then holding on to Ukrainian territory achieves exactly the opposite for Putin's regime. June 19th, 2025, no one will save Russia, neither our own people nor its leadership, says Strelkov. He warns that neither domestic nor external forces will bail out the country in its current path, and this only reflects the insecurity of Putin's pariah regime and actually the dependency that has been built on allies like China, allies which, in fact, Russia does not completely trust. In a May 15th post taken up in the Don press, Gerkin states that Russia faces a fierce summer-autumn military campaign in Ukraine. The armed forces of Ukraine will try to greatly surprise the Russian army, and it does not have the necessary strength and resolve to win. There he's talking, of course, about the Russian side. This is a devastating insight which suggests that Russia's strength and territorial progress has peaked and will start to go into reverse as mobilization and equipment issues kick in, not to mention the financial issues in supporting this particular way of populating the army, and it does not even take into account the deteriorating economic situation in Russia itself. So here is a summary of the key themes that Gerkin has mentioned in his recent correspondence. No clear victory goal. Russia has no strategic objective, making victory unachievable. The army has significant deficiencies, critical failures in intelligence, logistics, training, morale and leadership, and there is no sign that these are being addressed or reformed, or even that the regime is capable of such a reform. We are in a prolonged war. I think the Ukrainian side has recognized that for a long time. So has the Russian side, but Putin has believed that a long attritional war benefits Russia. Gerkin argues that's no longer the case, that it now benefits Ukraine, and the longer the conflict goes on, it gives Ukraine time to prepare and counterattack. He advises caution. He urges avoiding ambitious plans because Russia lacks internal control and control over its army, control over its resources that would be required to mount more ambitious plans. If those plans are under-resourced, then in Gerkin's words, they are simply doomed to failure. He forecasts that Ukraine will exploit Russia's stalling offensive and its weakening strength, and he gives a harsh warning. There is no rescue forthcoming. Russia must confront its own internal weaknesses. No one else is going to solve its problems for it. Well, here's the takeaway. Gerkin isn't a friend of Ukraine. He's a war criminal who one day needs to serve his time in The Hague, yet his critique makes logical sense and in the past has shown to be quite prophetic. The Kremlin is doubling down on the war despite losing ground. Mobilization looms large for ordinary people. The systemic oligarchs and officials are starting to fear for their lives. Putin's regime remains locked in denial, too rigid to adapt, too sensitive and hubristic to recalibrate and change. Can Ukraine leverage this failure and the emerging cracks in the regime? Can the successes in Sumy herald a turning point in this year's fighting for Ukraine? We'll continue to monitor English and Russian language sources for answers to these questions, and of course we will continue to seek out the best expert voices on these topics to interview on the channel.